Hi, thanks so much for coming. Do keep coming in, grab a sandwich, take a seat, and a really warm welcome to the first big questions of the year. This is a place to ask, discuss, and investigate some of the big questions about life, its meaning, and the claims of Jesus. So this week we're going to be looking at whether it's possible to be a rational Cambridge student and also believe in God. So in a moment we'll be hearing a short talk, and after that there'll be some time for questions. So please do text in your questions to the number that you'll see here on the lectern and on the pillars as well. We really want to hear what you think. We want to be able to have a discussion, so no question is off limits. We're really delighted to have Dr. Ben Cooper here as our speaker today. Ben studied economics here at King's and then went on to teach as a research fellow at Nuffield College in Oxford. So he now works for a church in Sheffield, where he's come from today. So please join me in welcoming Ben to the front.
Fantastic. Well, it's very good to be here. Just let me sort myself out briefly. Excellent. Now, a young woman called Michelle was driving late one night in rural Louisiana, and she was disturbed by her phone ringing, and her car hit an oncoming truck, and there was a major crash. And when she regained consciousness sometimes later, she rather strangely found herself in an underground bunker. Two other people were there and insisted to her that a catastrophic event had left the surface of the earth completely uninhabitable and that she couldn't move from where she was going. Now, very thankfully, that's not a true story, but it's the opening scenario of this film that came out last year called 10 Cloverfield Lane. I don't know if you've seen it. It might be not your kind of thing, but I quite enjoyed it when I saw it recently. And it's certainly a pretty good opening scenario. And I wondered, if you found yourself in that situation, what would you think? Who would you believe? What would be the rational thing to believe in that kind of circumstance? It's worth thinking through, isn't it? So what are the chances of a catastrophe that leaves the surface of the earth completely uninhabitable? It's kind of hard to work out what kind of figure, what probability you would place on that event. On the other hand, the chances of meeting a couple of crazy guys seems quite high. Might put a fairly high probability on that. And so surely Michelle was right and rational to conclude that the bunker that she found herself in was the unsafe place to be, and that safety would lie in escaping to the outside. On the other hand, she could have been wrong. It could have been entirely the other way around. Now, you might be wondering, what on earth has all of that got to do with the question that we're supposed to be thinking about this lunchtime? Can a rational Cambridge student believe in God? And let me make it clear, in most respects, it has absolutely nothing to do with it. But in one respect, at least, there's some similarity. You see, all of us, regardless of our situation, we all, like Michelle in that story, have to think a little bit about the wider context of our existence. In particular, is this cosmos, this universe that we find ourselves in, and that we can see and experience and measure scientifically in all sorts of ways, is it all there is? So here's a recent NASA pictorial sort of presentation of the universe. Looks rather good. It's obviously a very small scale. This is one of NASA's pictures. The question is, does that fit into a wider context without which it doesn't make any sense? A wider context that we ignore at our peril. Now, you'll know that the mainstream view in our culture is that there is no wider context, not one that matters anyway. And we might say that the mainstream view is that speculations there might be a wider context are perhaps an artifact of our evolutionary history. These are ideas that are exploited by religious people for personal gain or power. And denying that wider context can feel very liberating. It liberates us from those restrictive ideas. And to many people, this feels sensible and it feels good. So while we're in a wider context, we deny it, and it can feel like being liberated, being part of a liberation narrative. But what if all of that is mistaken? What if all that is mistaken? What if, for example, the Christian claims about the wider context in which we live turn out to be true, and that it's entirely rational to believe them? By rational here, I mean something like this, without inconsistency or contradiction. Can a rational Cambridge student, were such a person to exist, can a rational Cambridge student believe in God without inconsistency or contradiction? Now, as I try and give you a positive answer to that this lunchtime, the way I want to do it is to show you how we might come to rational beliefs about this kind of thing. And I want to do so with the help of the opening verses of the Gospel of John. And in fact, on your tables, you'll find some copies of the Gospel of John. So if you can get hold of one of those and open it up and turn to page 4, and you'll find John chapter 1. I'm going to try and do this with the help of this passage. I'm not going to read all of it to us because my time is short, but let me read some of the verses here. So from John chapter 1 and verse 1. You might be familiar with this from carol services. On the other hand, this might be the very first time you've heard these words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. I'm going to pick it up again at verse 9. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, nor a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. I want to try and persuade you this lunchtime it is possible to come to a rational and sensible belief in God. But this passage from John's Gospel will actually force me to acknowledge that in many ways it's not straightforward to come to a belief like that. Indeed, we're extremely unlikely, it turns out, to come to sensible beliefs about this on our own. These are unusual and spectacular claims, and in many ways we're naturally resistant to accepting them. In other words, we could do with some help. We could really do with some help, and we could do with some help in at least 3 different ways. And the first is this: we could really do with some help from the outside. From the outside. We could do some help from the outside because that's the very nature of the claim that we're talking about here. It's a claim that's expressed right at the beginning of our passage. Let me read those words again. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. This is the Christian claim about the wider context in which our universe fits. In the beginning, before the cosmos existed, there was the Word, and the Word was nothing less than God himself. He is the one who called the cosmos into existence. Nothing exists apart from the fact that he chose for it to be so. That's the claim. That's the Christian claim. The question is, of course, how could anyone go about proving that? How can anyone come to a kind of sensible, rational belief that this is indeed the case? Now, it may well be that there is sufficient evidence sort of there in the world as we see it to justify this claim. You know, it might be, for example, that if we thought really carefully about it, the fact of our existence, the intelligibility of the universe around us, we might conclude that this must be how it is. The problem is, of course, that for most of us, that's just really too big a stretch. That's a really hard belief to come to, especially given our natural resistance to the idea, which I'll come back to later. So what would help here? What would make a difference to us believing this or not? Well, one thing that really might help if there was a kind of interaction between the two contexts, the two different levels that we're talking about. Thinking again of that scenario I began with from the 10 Cloverfield Lane film. So there's Michelle, she's in the bunker, and she may have certain beliefs about what's going on outside. But it isn't until she actually goes outside and sees for herself that she properly finds out the slightly bizarre answer to that question. Now, for us, sort of going outside the cosmos to see what might be outside there isn't really an option. For this particular problem we're thinking about, it would be, I think, a little bit like imagining Sherlock Holmes trying to seek out and find and question the author of the books that he's part of, question Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But what if, so that kind of movement seems a bit unlikely, doesn't it? But what about if there was movement in the other direction? What if the author of creation wrote himself into his own story, as it were? And this is what John claims in his gospel. Verse 9, the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He lived among us as the person we know in history as Jesus of Nazareth. And John finishes this section by saying this, is verse 18, no one has ever seen God but the one and only Son who is himself God and is in the closest relationship with the Father, well, he has made him known. So I guess this is the first thing I want to say. Rational belief in God is not down to some very peculiar way of interpreting the universe or any other kind of extreme mental gymnastics. It's made a whole lot more plausible and possible if God has acted himself decisively, broken in to make himself known at some point in history in some kind of obvious and visible fashion. All of which makes the claim we're thinking about this lunchtime a historical claim, which takes us to our second point. Given that the claim is a historical one, well, we could do with some witnesses. We could do with some credible eyewitnesses. That is, it would really help, wouldn't it, if the people who saw this happen, who actually knew Jesus of Nazareth and heard the things that he said and saw the things that he did, it would be really helpful if they wrote it down faithfully and truthfully for us in future generations. Well, that's also part of the claim in the passage we're looking at this lunchtime, which introduces us to, in fact, two eyewitnesses. Both of them, in fact, called John. The first is John the Baptist. He's introduced in verses 6 to 7 as a witness. He's the witness who's come to testify to the light coming into the world. But the second eyewitness is actually John himself, the author of this gospel. And his personal testimony begins here in verse 14. And it goes like this: we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. In fact, I might say the whole of John's gospel is very much presented as his testimony, his eyewitness testimony concerning Jesus of Nazareth. It's what he heard and saw, all culminating in Jesus' resurrection, an event I think you're going to be looking at a little later this term, these lunchtimes. Now, you'll probably know that there are many, many people around who don't accept what I've just said. They don't accept the gospel accounts as credible, authentic eyewitness testimony. If you do come to read John's gospel with someone, I hope that it surprises you. This is not, you will find, a sort of blunt religious text making sort of unsupported assertion after unsupported assertion, bullying you into belief by a sheer act of will. No, this is written as a persuasive text It's an unusual persuasive text. It takes a little while to sort of get used to the way that John writes, but it's a persuasive text, and John is doing everything he can to present the fullness of what he's seen in Jesus Christ, and he's working hard to convince us of his sincerity and to overcome all those biases and prejudices. This is what he says. Let me finish with this. This is what he says later on in the gospel, towards the end, in fact. And I think it's hard not to be moved by the way that he's imploring us as we read this to take what he's seen and heard and recorded for us seriously. He says this: "The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe." Well, good, my time is up. We're going to have a quick break now, I think, and then some opportunity for some questions in a little while. So do discuss the sort of things that we've been talking around your tables, and if you've got nothing else to talk about, think about together whether you have actually read this gospel for yourself, and if not, will you? And if you have, will you read it again with someone else?
Great, so sorry to butt in there. Do carry on those conversations afterwards. And do keep texting in questions. We'd really love to hear your questions. There's also a roving mic going around, so if you'd like to just ask a question from the floor, just stick up a hand and we can bring that over to you. So would anyone like to kick us off with questions from the floor? Any hands? If not, oh, there's a hand. Is that one there? No. Okay. So do you want to use the mic here? Great. So you've talked about the Christian faith and rational belief in the Christian God. What about other faiths? Is it possible to have rational beliefs about them?
Well, I suppose one thing we can say for sure, in some ways it's possible to have rational beliefs about all sorts of things. What do we mean by rationality? It just means that they're, in some ways, the beliefs are consistent. They don't involve any kind of contradictions with one another. And even if we're not sort of super rational, like some approaches take, so that we're sort of updating all our beliefs in a sort of super fantastic way, we can still have sort of at least roughly rational beliefs, and it's going to depend on where we start from, where we end up with in terms of what we believe. But with regard, so I've talked about a particular claim about the wider context in which our universe might fit. There are, of course, many other claims about that. And what I would suggest is that, if you're interested in that, consider all of them. But all of them are going to face some of the difficulties that we've been talking about. How can you really know that there's something beyond? The Christian claim does have this as a unique difference, I think, that the author of creation has actually broken into his own creation. It's got that kind of movement into it. So that makes the Christian claim slightly distinct and helps us a great deal, I think, when it comes to forming rational beliefs about this particular claim. But any claim is worth investigating.
Great, thank you. So another question. Where does the assumption that humans have a resistance to religious belief come from? This seemed to be a key base of your argument, but historically humans have mostly had strong religious beliefs.
Yeah, so the observation that once we've established, if you like, a worldview or an ethical system or a way of thinking about life, that we're very resistant to changing that. That was the claim that I was making. And in fact, that's an empirically observable claim. You can put people in experimental situations and test their resistance to certain things. You can test the way that whether they're prepared to change their ethical view in certain circumstances. And there's a lot of research sort of based around that idea. What that means is that yes, if you like, your background and your culture may well shape what you think about things. Once you've got that, very often it's quite hard to kind of shake it off. You need a sort of special effort to go that far. No, it's true in the past, if we went back 500 years, the culture would have been different. There would have been much more of a Christian ethos around. So in that sense, it wouldn't have been such a struggle to assess those beliefs. They might not have been put under pressure quite so much. But the culture today is different, so we do have to sort of face that.
Thank you. Would anyone like to come back on that? Great. Just wait for the mic. It's just coming. Thanks.
Hi. You said that other faiths don't have the gods as being part of the world. But what about the ones that do? For example, the Egyptian pharaohs were considered gods on earth, and the Greek religion has the demigods, which are similar.
That's very true. What's the difference there? I suppose the difference there is that the Egyptian gods and the Greek gods, they're what we might call superhuman, rather than necessarily God in the same sense that the Christian claim is. So the Christian claim is that out of nothing, the cosmos owes existence to one particular God. Okay, so that's what makes the difference there. So that sets the wider context. So other kinds of gods, like those sort of the gods in Egyptian or Greek experience, are not really going to tell you very much about a wider context to the cosmos. They're just part of the cosmos.
That's not true either. In the Egyptian religion, at least, it started with one original god who created Earth and everyone in it. He just also created other gods.
Okay. So in that sense, yes. But is it? Yeah. I still think there is a difference, isn't there? There is a difference in the way that we can. So the particular claim that we're looking at in the passage from John's Gospel, that we can actually engage with this God in a personal way. But all these things are open to investigation, aren't they?
Sorry to have to break into that discussion. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for at the moment. So thank you very, very much,
Great.
Ben.
Thank you.
And I know some of you will have lectures and labs, but if you don't, there's really no rush to leave. There'll be some snacks coming out to you at your tables. So please do carry on those conversations. Keep chatting, keep asking those questions. And Ben will be here afterwards as well. So if you feel you weren't able to ask your question or kind of fully flesh out what you wanted to ask, do grab him. He'll be here at the front, and he'd love to chat more about that. Also on your tables, you'll see some cards, some feedback cards. We'd really love to know how you found the event and how we can make it better. And also, if you'd like to chat more about this or any other questions, just tick the I'm interested box and someone from the Christian Union will get in touch with you. But as Ben said, the best way to look into this for yourself is to read John's account of Jesus' life. If you want to read that with someone else, do just tick that I'm interested box, and someone would love to do that with you. And these are free for you to take away. We'd love for you to make the most of that. Also on your tables, there's lots of things, is a flyer for big questions for the rest of term, and it tells you what the questions are each week. We'd love to see you back here again. And so next Friday, we're looking at miracles. Are they too good to be true? Before next Friday, though, if you are a fresher, we have an event tomorrow evening called Taste and See, which is an event with live jazz, puddings, chance to meet each other, and a short talk as well, looking at fulfillment. What are we looking for at uni? So if you're a fresher, I'd really, really love to see you at that. Take one of these away and bring friends as well. Great. At the back as well, there's some books that will help you think more about this question and others. They're free for you to take away. One of them, The Reason for God, will hopefully address this in more than a 20-minute talk can. And so it'd be great if you wanted to use that to think about this question more. I think that's it from me. Hopefully see you next Friday. And if you're a fresher, see you tomorrow evening. Thanks so much again for coming.